We can
Okay,
draw on the screen?
I think so. All right, so I'm just gonna quickly, before we get into this week. Okay, I'm gonna lock it down, you guys. They're like, it's not me. Somebody's drawing on it. All right, so I'm just gonna draw a box really quick. This is our room, okay? And if we say that this is our room, I don't know how to get different colors. Here we go. So if you set a hide on this side of the room, and this is like hot outside, so it's like an outside wall, and this is an inside wall, it can happen, especially if you've got windows on this wall, that this odor will rise in the space, hit the ceiling. As it comes across the room, it will start to drop because it's cooler down here. And now you get this diffuse picture on this side of the room. So then as you're working, your dog's starting to just kind of show interest on the opposite side, but nothing really direct, and maybe even climbing the wall a little bit on this side. If you have that happening, and unless you have a dog that's working detective, I would pull them out of the room. Because I don't think that's fair, especially on this side, because they're going to start identifying objects on the ceiling, on the walls, something that they're going to try and associate that odor to. And it's not necessarily going to be beneficial. Now, if you have a dog that's going into detective, elite level dog and a CSW, I do think that this is something worth working, but I want you to be very thoughtful and create it with purpose. So with that being said, it's going to be a smaller space. You know you've got windows on this side. Your hide is actually nose level on this side. Okay, so this is nose level. It's very much accessible for your dog, but you have odor information over here, and you're going to have to leave it for maybe at least 20 minutes to create this kind of situation. But 20 minutes might be too long because then you're going to get some odor down here, enough for them to solve the problem on this side. It helps if you bring them in and start them over here to start with. But what you're trying to do is teach them that if this is not successful and it's light and fluffy, they might even be able to find a line on one of the walls to be able to work back to it. But this is a skill to work, and it's not always going to be solvable. It depends on the height of your ceiling. Okay. But it is something to consider if you have a dog that's working, and kind of why I'm saying it in this class is we're talking about when to abort a search. I would abort a search when you have this happening and your dog is not confident, right? So we need them to be able to be successful on these. We're trying to teach them elevated heights. This isn't fair, right? Because there's no source. And so now you're teaching your dog possibly to fringe,
Right.
right?
So
So
if Journey was to go over to the red area and
yeah,
still then not be able to really source it, but she just keeps checking the red area, kind of like that, this example was kind of the situation, but then she just kept
pretty
staring
cool.
at me.
Yeah, because she's like, there's no hide, there's no source. It's just pooling.
Yeah.
You took the hide out of there,
Right.
right?
Okay.
So I would just recall the dog. We're leaving the search. Thank you. Put them on leash or grab them by the collar, leave the search, and either lower this or just be done. Knowing
Right.
that this room, that's not going to happen. Now, you could put hide in here. You could just move your hide to that side of the space, put it slightly above nose level, and then search it again. Now your
Okay.
dog's going to have a source in there, right? And you can use
Yeah.
the picture that you've created
Okay. Cool.
because you know air's dropping now on this side.
Right.
Now,
Okay.
something we haven't talked about are fans. Now, this is like a lot of odor theory stuff that would go into odor theory class. But if you have a fan that's like rotating in here, if it's sucking air up, it's going to kick odor down the walls. If it is pushing air down, which is what it's supposed to be doing in the summer, you're supposed to flip them. So then it's pulling that hair and it's doing this. Right. So now you've got this weird pool of odor that's just kicking into objects, but it doesn't have any understanding. So now your high hides are just getting sucked up the walls.
Which would also make it difficult.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
So we have to think about ceiling fans. They can become a problem.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about this week's. This week's a little bit more straightforward. We're just kind of building on last week a little bit more, adding more challenge, how to add challenge, all that kind of fun stuff. So, all right, I've kept this in here because I think it's important when to mark and reward, really maintaining that balance. So If your dog is not showing enough drive to source, we need to add more value for that drive and marking and rewarding that drive. Guessing that push, right? That drive in, and then reward placement still. Try and reward as close to source as possible. So if you have an inaccessible, you are ready to open a door, open a way, or just reaching in as close as source as possible, right? We want to really encourage them that that's the rewardable spot, not hitting fringe and then telling us about the fringe of it. Okay. So I've kept that in there, just kind of a reminder. And then a reminder again from last week, we talked about watching. Are you waiting or observing? We're trying to stay in that learning mindset. We're trying to learn and improve our own skills for observation. So where did your dog first encounter odor information? That's normally that initial head flip where they're slowing down. Where did your dog start to recognize the odor is in there and not collecting in that space? So dog's focus is no longer collecting information from away, although they still might, right? So they might be going back and forth, and then they go out, check a chair, and then they come back in. That still is they're recognizing it's in there, and that's their confirmation that really tells you that that's happening. And then where is the location of strongest odor concentration based on your dog's behavior? What behaviors led you to think about that? That's essentially where they're stopping. So they're sniffing, 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 stop. That is your midpoint of rewarding, right? So after that stop is your behavior. Before that stop is, I think there's odor in there, and rewarding that allows you to reward that push and that effort. But if you do a lot of that, now we're rewarding too early. So we're trying to figure out where's that stop point. That's your ideal moment. That's if we're trying to mimic pairing, meaning the food is at source and they're getting that cookie because they got to source, that's that stop moment. That's where we're trying to reward. That's building that value for odor itself. Okay. All right. I put this in here, what do we do to submit? Because I had a bunch of questions on, there's a lot out there. There's a lot of things that you could be doing. I don't necessarily think that you need to do them all. Pick one puzzle and you're going to progress and keep kind of progressing through the levels, right? And keep that as your focus. Or you can kind of play with a whole bunch of different things and know that you're going to have to keep working on them separately later, right? So use it however you want to use it. So don't feel overwhelmed that there's so many things to do. Kind of pick away at whatever works for you. All right. The last kind of concept before we dive into the assignments for this week is pooling versus inaccessible. And that's really what we're trying to get at for drive to source, right? What we talked about last week. So we're trying to teach the dog to get as close to source as possible, meaning that they have this belief that they will be paid. Right? If they have that belief that when they put their nose on source, they will be paid and they want to be paid, you're going to have a dog that will try and get there no matter what, right? And the more that we can create that understanding, that value, that motivation, the easier that reading your dog in pooling versus source is going to be. All right. When you're working something that's open, it's possible that it's accessible and blowing somewhere, especially if it's going to blow onto an inaccessible looking area. And you might be calling that inaccessible looking area as a hide. I've done it once and it sucked because I'm like, I should follow my own learning, right? But it's that kind of situation that we have a problem. Odor blowing onto it, it's catching. The hide is not there. It's actually blowing from somewhere else. That's an open hide. We need to make sure that our dogs understand that situation, that they're not just hitting on, there's an object that looks like it should be in an inaccessible versus the odor itself. And then the same kind of thing can happen is the opposite, where if you have an inaccessible hide that is near other objects that's collecting some of that odor from the inaccessible hide and you're facing those other objects, your dog might get stuck on objects instead of working to the source, right? Same kind of pooling problem, but opposite picture. Where is the inaccessible? Is it actually inaccessible? So there are some environmental conditions that are going to make pooling more difficult. Environmental meaning rain, humidity, sun, wind, all those kinds of things, sunny, dry, shady, all that kind of stuff. Pressure systems, storm systems rolling through can change some of that kind of ability and pooling that can happen. So here's an example where I had some calls on the cabinets over here because people were thinking it's an inaccessible hide because there's pooling odor on the cabinets and the dogs are working the cabinets as though it was inaccessible behavior, but it was actually slightly elevated I would consider this almost an inaccessible hide, but it's not technically 4 feet. But this elevated hide is open and blowing over. So if the handler's back is to the stool and facing these cabinets, you can create enough interest that your dog is also going to believe that it's an inaccessible hide, even though there's no source there. And that's what we're trying to train, is that our dogs are going to go to source, wherever source is, no matter where the handler is going, right? And we can be playing with some of that proofing piece, which is a little bit of what we're doing this week. Okay, so this is kind of something that we're working through. We're trying to work on to make sure that our dogs are understanding source pays, not just odor accumulation, even though it can accumulate enough for the dog to think that a source is in there. So could your dog work this puzzle? If you were only facing the cabinet, your back is to the stool, can they work past your pressure to source? What if it was opposite? What if you were facing the stool and the odor's catching on the stool all the time and your back is to the cabinet? Can your dog work this little diffuse odor information, even though it's not tractor beam pulling them in? Can they work to that inaccessible behind you? Okay, so those are kind of those little questions. This is a real life situation of a trial where that could have happened. Yeah, so question about wood stool versus metal stool. So wood's going to hold it a little bit more at source, but if it's an open set hide, meaning like there's a lot of airflow under it. So if I'm just thinking of wood stool, just like your very standard wood stool, and the hide is on the underside of that, you've got still a lot of airflow that's going to move that away. So although you're going to have more at source, this is fabric on the top. I think it's holding a lot of odor on the fabric self part of it, right? But it's open and it's going to move across pretty easily. So I think the openness of the hide set influences how much odor is available to collect on some of these other sources that creates those pooling problems even more difficult. Okay. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. Just had a question. Okay. I'm like, where did that extra little red thing come? Okay. So let's talk about the first one, containment under. So last week we worked with inside for containment, right? Inside a little cabinet, filling that void of the cabinet. I don't think necessarily everybody's done. I gave you a lot of like little tidbits, those who are posting. And there are some dogs that I'm like, let's kind of slow down a little bit, right? Let's build a little bit more understanding of what is in there. How do I tell you about in there? Not losing the drive and the understanding of how to tell you or that they can tell you, right? So kind of think about that. Containers are inaccessible, right? Technically, the hide's in the middle, and then they have to work to source. So under is another example. So here's a rolling cart. Perfect example of an inaccessible hide that can be set on the very middle underside of this rolling cart. Totally acceptable. You'll see something like that in NW3. It might be on a wheel as well, but it could be set underneath, and that would be considered an inaccessible hide. I would not put this past excellent inaccessible hide. You got 360 degrees around it that they can work. A great inaccessible hide to work for excellent, right? Masters, if you're putting this with some other puzzles in the search area, that's kind of a fun inaccessible hide. It's nice and clean. The dogs can hit it very easily. It's contained underneath, but coming to an answer and which side to come to that answer is a little bit more ambiguous. And that allows for that kind of extra time that happens on these upper level hides. Okay. So you're looking for the behavior as your dog is working those kinds of things, nose low to the ground, working around multiple edges of it, possibly laying down. Okay, so that's maybe is the behaviors I might see. I've also seen like reaching with the paw underneath. Shouldn't be pawing hides, but you might see that, right? Is that they're trying to get that out. When you're asking for alerts on these, which we're going to work on next week, can they actually alert it? Would you be able to read what that looks like? Or are you going to read just your dog's interest and intensity under? As soon as they're hitting under from multiple sides, it's not a chair blowing underneath. It is from that location. So now your dog is you're able to call it, right? When do you call it in a trial? Okay, here's the hard part, because it's always it depends. If the hide is here, blowing underneath, you will have judges that will not accept this side of the cart. It happens. Probably not an ACSW, but AKC, there are judges that will only accept up on this end and probably mostly just the wheel. I've seen it in NECSW, but it's not as common. Lower levels probably more common than upper levels. Okay. So Yes. Do I want my dog to continue working in around the whole thing? Yeah, because what if it's accessible on a wheel? My dog could have solved it. Right? Some judges won't care. Some judges, even if it's on the wheel, will take anywhere on the underside of this whole cart. Probably depends on the size of the cart, air conditions, all that kind of stuff, how the demo dog worked it. But in general, some judges will accept the whole thing. Some judges will only accept this end of it. Keep that in mind. The more your dog is going to work it, the more you don't have to worry about it. Now, if the hide's dead center under the middle, the yes zone for that hide should be anywhere along the whole size. Okay. This is where it gets hard, because how do you know in a trial? You do not know. You cannot know. You won't know. And so all you have available to you is allowing your dog to work 360 degrees around, or as many sides as they can access, and give you the strongest point of odor. That's all you can do.
Is that what we should encourage then our dogs to do? If we see,
Yes.
like, if they start to just go sniff, sniff in one corner and they kind of say, okay, it's here.
I want more work.
Okay, and we should like kind of encourage them to check each end of it. Or
Encourage by saying nothing.
right, but kind of a little bit forward movement if they're kind of stuck there.
No, nothing.
Okay.
Right? Because what happens is if the dog goes, okay, this is a great conversation. Let me use green. So if the dog goes sniff, sniff, and then they look at you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thinking about ABCs. So antecedent is odor under the cart, right? So then the dog looked at you. Okay. So the dog's looking because of the cart, or the behaviors that look. Okay. So ABC. So A is odor under the cart. B is look at you. C, what's the consequence of looking at you? Because whatever C happens affects A. Right? This starts becoming a cycle. So if our C, our consequence of them looking at you, is to move forward. So now we're starting to move forward. Now we are creating a situation where this is going to occur more often, because the move forward is information. It's valuable. It's a reward.
Right. Okay.
Now we got a problem, because now the dog's going to fringe, look at us, and now we have to respond to them every time. Now we got a degradation of trust.
Okay.
Okay, so I'd much rather see the consequence of their little chain here to be no feedback from you. Continuing doing what you were doing before they encountered A. The little bit of odor information. Because what we're trying to do is extinguish this behavior. Don't look at me. Only look at me when you're on source. I'm worthless until that point. Right? So if we're trying to get rid of B, we need to get rid of C so that A doesn't create the behavior.
I see.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, just keep standing still and let them keep working at
no
it.
feedback. It is so hard, because we love to give our dogs feedback when they look at us.
Right.
But it is a slippery slope, because once they start learning that, then we can have a problem. And it's whatever you were doing at A, continue it. So if you were walking, you might have to continue walking, because you don't want their little look to create a stop in you.
Oh, okay.
That's a behavior response as well, right? We don't want to give them feedback. So if you're standing and you're watching them source, continue standing, watching them source. If you were slowly following behind them, you're going to be slowly following behind them, kind of the same trajectory.
Okay.
Trying not to create, because some dogs are then going to apply motion to it, right? And we got all these extra pieces. And that's why we're trying to do this independently as much as possible. So you're doing very little handling to start with.
Right.
Okay. This is the big one.
Yeah.
Don't give them feedback, because we don't need that behavior to happen. Let's get rid of the behavior.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Good question. Super, super question. All right. So hopefully this kind of solves that other question that's kind of popping up is, do I let them continue working? Should I let them continue? Why am I supposed to let them continue working? All that kind of fun stuff. And the simplest version, the thing that we're going to say is, if you always interrupt, you are training them to hit that quick spot. And yeah, they might be correct, but they might be wrong when it's on a wheel, and they're going to get it now. So we want to see that work. We want to see them go through that effort. And what was really interesting, and I kind of have to say this, is when I'm watching the videos, because I used Tana as a demo, and these were videoed back in 2021, a lot of these example videos. I can see a huge difference between her in 2021 when I videoed these and today. Her drive to source is phenomenal today compared to where they were. I see a little kind of questions. I see a little like, am I close enough? I never see those now. But that's because I've been following my own examples of I don't give feedback. I only reward as much as possible on source when I give her enough time to source out the problem. She has a lot of drive for source, so I can wait for a lot more, right? But if she's going to struggle, if she's a little softer, I might have to split that down a little bit more, shape the behavior until we're right on source.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say Ruby does what you just said. She goes to the wheel, she looks at me and I just ignore her and just wait. And
Mhm.
she goes all the way around, she stops at the wheel and looks at me again. Now that's telling me that's where it is, right? I should reward her then?
Good reward her there. If
Yeah.
that's where she decided was strongest, perfect. Let's go for it. But I want to see her working before she says that.
Okay, so all the way around at least. And then if she's alerts the same spot, then reward her for that. Because in a trial, you're not gonna know if that's the right spot or not.
You're not, right? You have to trust them.
Oh,
In
yeah.
these situations, you always know where your hides are because
Yeah.
it's hard to do inaccessibles without. So
Okay.
here's the exception, right? So your dog comes up, they don't necessarily have to go all the way around, but if they do this, and then they go back and forth, and then they settled right here, and then they tell you that it's that location, I'm okay, then I go upwind. Right? They didn't get all the way around, but they definitely turned around and said, that's weaker. I don't need to go up there. That's not strong enough. And so then they turn around and they turn around. I'm okay with that because they have definitely done their work. It's like in elementary school, show your work. You can't just say 4. Is it 1 + 3? Is it 2 + 2? Right? You have to show your work. And that's what this is showing your work. The dog who comes in, so the dog who alerts here, let me use a different green. It is really hard to see with that. Okay. So if the dog alerts here, hard to say, versus the dog that comes up and goes here, that pink one might get aware. Dog didn't show their work. Does the handler actually understand the hide is inaccessible underneath? Some judges might give you aware. Technically, it's correct. It's exactly the same spot as that other dog alerted, but the other dog gave you all the work. There is no question that the handler and the dog both understand the hide is directly under the middle. That's the difference. Does that make sense? You don't want to make your judge go, yeah, right? That sucks. You don't want that because now you're doubting things. How far away was I, right? Versus the dog that comes up. Now, here is the other reason why I think it's very important that the dog does this work is say that this is a much larger object and your dog just alerts on one end and you call it, you get a yes, even if it's kind of a concrete yes, because the judge says, well, yeah, it's this hottest location. The dog's not wrong. Now the dog goes to another side of the object and starts working because it's the same odor picture, but never showed it was inaccessible before. Maybe it looked like a wheel. Now gives another alert behavior. The handler now is going, is this a separate hide or is this the same one? They never saw the work on the first one, so now maybe they call it again. It's a fault in AKC. It's not a fault in any CSW, but if you're trying to count hides, it took a hide away. This could happen in elite. Right? So now we got a problem. Now we've got doubt issues, and those doubt issues suck. And this is typically what happens when the dog does this first initial pink pop and they get a yes. Now we get some problems because the dog is still working that same odor because the dog never understood it was inaccessible. This is where we try and fix it in training to build understanding in both parties that that work has to be shown before the reward happens. Okay. It's important. I've seen it a lot more in detective and elite recently, where an inaccessible is blowing and pooling and the dog hasn't done the work on the front end. It happens at some point, is what I'm trying to say, whether you want it or not. All right. So when we're doing this, your target is something with low clearance so that your dog can't get their nose on the hide. That's your goal. If they can get their nose on the hide, it's no longer inaccessible. We're trying to aim for low enough things that your dog can't get to it. So a table is going to be way too high. Right? Maybe if you have a coffee table with the bottom like shelf of a coffee table really low, or an ottoman, perfect. Okay. Distance the height is from the edge of an object. That's something you can manipulate. That's a variable. If you pick one side and closer to one corner or one edge, now you should have a better predictability of where that final answer is going to happen without any airflow changes, right? If you've got some airflow that's moving through your space, like right now my AC unit is on, I might have airflow coming from that direction of the room to the other direction of the room. So maybe I want to set my hide on the downwind side of that object, 6 inches off, and I still will be able to have that confidence. Versus if it's on the opposite side, my 6 inches off won't matter because it's going to blow through that whole thing and the strongest point is on the other side. Example of that is working vehicles. Hides on one wheel and it's blowing underneath the vehicle, your dog is trying to indicate on the other side. It's still a skill that we need to work through to be able to get to that strongest side, where the dog learns to poke through. Here's an application of this under skill that's not even inaccessible. It's how to work to the accessible side of a vehicle for a hide that's blowing through. Okay, so that's kind of that piece. Second piece is size of your object. Level 1 dogs, I want you to be working a pretty small object like that cart. For a level 3 dog, it could be a big bed, and see if you can crawl underneath and shove your hide as deep as possible with a string on it or something. Right? So the size of the object, it's the distance away from any edge that the odor is going to be. Amount of odor is going to be much less on all the sides. It's going to be more diffuse and your dog is going to have to work a little bit more. And then the access your dog has to the object. If they have 4 sides to work, that object is very different than 1 side to work, which is very difficult. Right? So a couch against a wall with 2 tables on either side is a very different picture than a chest or an ottoman in the middle of the room, right? The objects that you can use, smaller things might be like a cater board or a small object with short legs. A larger object like a sofa or a chair with low clearance. Beds can be quite difficult underneath. They absorb odor and they kind of make it more difficult to work. Coffee tables, look around your house, see what you can use. If it's cool enough out, you could even play this with a vehicle. Inaccessible, a foot under the front corner of your vehicle. The backside of a wheel, right? So we're still playing with inaccessible aspects, but allowing your dog to settle in on the hottest side of that object. Okay. So level 1, you don't need to start facing the object necessarily. We were seeing that last week where some people were just facing the hide and the dog ran right into the hide, especially with some of the elevated stuff. And it was kind of fun to watch the dogs because they're like, odor high. Oh, there it is. And they ran right to it. It was really kind of fun to watch. Not necessarily learning the patterning of what the odor picture looks like for those hides, but it was fun to watch. Now, allow them to be attracted to the novelty of the new thing, right? Especially if you're really new to this and the dog's not really understanding that odor could be under or like at their feet level, then something like that can be really helpful. Level 2, moderate sized room, a little bit more room would be good, a little bit more complexity in your search area. Odor should draw them in. Level 3, you can do it in multiple spaces. You can still work that tighter odor that they have to work through and kind of seek, right? Level 1, hide set 6 inches from the edge of a probably smaller object. Repeat it, rotating the object around and putting it more into the middle. Hide is placed for level 2 under the middle of an object, but a little bit larger size object. So I have like a little couch that I used in the video, a perfect example. Hide it as deep as you can, making sure that you can get it out. Level 3, Elite Detective. I want you to set 2 hides out there. Now we're going to be playing with converging. Now we're going to be playing with multiple hides. I do request that if your dog struggles with multiple hides and you're having to manage it, you cannot remove the odor picture so that the dog isn't going to try and go back to a found hide. I don't think that this is fair on a dog that isn't confident with find another and kind of getting stuck on a found hide. Okay, so I'd say don't do level 3 with this, keep with single hides and allow your dog to learn the pictures of those first. 4 feet away, so pretty close, 2 low hides, and we're asking for the dog to recognize that pattern and for you to recognize that pattern. Really start looking at what does your dog look like as they come running in from working other areas to tell you that there are 2 hides in that space. Do they have a back and forth foot pattern? Do their heads swing back and forth? Do they do a circle? Are they checking one thing, sort of, checking another thing, sort of, and then going back? I want you to really be looking at those things because you're starting to train your mind on what those hides look like for detective, for elite, so that you know, oh, I think there might be a second hide in here. Train that gut feeling of what that looks like for your dog. Okay. Aging about 10 minutes. If you do a really long age, you're going to have a lot more odor in the space. You might have some pooling that they have to work through. It might also be easier. It depends on your conditions. All right. I do get picky about source with my dog, and this is kind of what we talked about. Actually, let's do this one. Okay, so this first one, I placed it under the side. It's like right on the edge lip of a small little chest. This is my level 1, inaccessible, just starting. So the chest is here. I'm asking my dog to search. She's like, oh, there's odor. But you can see how low to the ground this is. That's the difficulty. There's very little bit odor information because it's holding much tighter. So here she catches it and very quickly can come to her answer on the hottest side. And I'm rewarding her for that. So here I've got a Kato board. Now it's about 2 inches in, accessible on 4 sides. I want her on that side where I've placed the hide. So this is where I'm asking for a little bit of criteria for her. So she's working some motor, moving around, catching that odor. I'm letting her learn through experience that those tighter odor pictures exist and that it's on her to try and figure it out. So here she's on the kind of downwind side, but I want her to get her nose as close to source as possible. So I wait for her to get to the correct side. Okay, so now here, this one's at about 10 inches deep. 4 sides were accessible, so I made sure that there wasn't the table in the way. She's working around this small little couch. I'm letting the odor information pull her in. A little cookie she caught. So here she hits on the downwind side. She's correcting herself. And then she gets into where she considers is the hottest. And I'm going to reward her for that because I know it was 10 inches in from this side. So this side of the couch should be hotter. I'm going to accept only this side for her. I'm asking for that criteria. Okay. So now we do a little bit more difficult. Locked on 2 sides. So I've got a table over here and I rolled my coffee table in from the other side. So here she's catching odor. I had used the previous search to give me information on how she wanted to solve it. So I put this in front of where she was wanting to stand, right? I'm increasing difficulty. I'm adding a challenge. What can you do now that there's a barrier in your way? Well, she crawls underneath. Cool. Awesome. I really like that. She's showing a lot of push. I'm going to reward her for it. So here I've got the couch pushed against a wall. It's like, I don't know, 6 inches, 8 inches in as far as I could reach it. And she's a little fringing here. She even looks at me. She's like, isn't it close enough? I'm like, no. And I put the ottoman in the way. So I've added a lot of challenges to it. And here, because I was testing with the Sears beforehand, I know it was the hottest location. So that's where I marked and rewarded. Okay. So kind of showing you some progressions. You could see the couch here is only like maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches off the ground. A small couch on a carpet would be perfect. I think the carpet itself will hold the odor a little bit more than like tile, that this is tile. So with the tile, the airflow is going to move across underneath the surface much more easily. You can be a little bit more precise and say, no, I'm not accepting that other side of the couch. I want you on this side of the couch. I'm going to wait you out until you get to the correct side. Right. And so you can see that with me. I'm not trying to move in or give any feedback when she's not correct. I'm waiting for her to solve it on her own and get to that hottest point. Yeah, so I think carpet would be a great option. Just be aware you might have to keep it on that, like maybe only 4 inches away from the edge to start with, and then increase the distance going in. Because you can think, like just as Tana went in for this very first one, she's ripping around. She's looking for odor to hit her in the face. She wants this open hide, but this chest is quite low to the ground. There's not a lot of airflow coming out from underneath the chest. It's nice and contained. And if this was sitting for an hour, it would be a really nice hide. But it's only 5-10 minutes max, 5 minutes probably for this one. She had to get her nose to the edge and she went, oh my gosh, look at that. The more of those kind of surprise situations, the more it teaches the dog to check these objects as they go through, and not just at nose height, but at low height. Okay. So inaccessible under. Any more questions? Good, this one? Happy? Okay. Inaccessible due to reach. So last week we did some X pens, we did some barriers. This week we are putting a little bit more difficulty to that kind of situation. So I would like to see that tightness. We're trying to replicate the dog having to go within tight spaces where they visually don't always see the handler. When my dog is working a hide like under a table, I'm not leaning over to try and see her nose. That's her job. I'm looking at her hind end, because through puzzles like this, I'm watching to see, what does her tail look like? What do her back feet do when she's on source, when she's ready to alert? What does that look like? Listen for them. Use just your ears. Can you hear when they are done? Typically, you're going to hear when they stop sniffing. Yes, you can mark and reward that. If they're under the couch and they've been working, or the table, and they've been working the right spot, go for it. You can kind of see the body's not like bent weird. If they're aiming the right direction and you hear them stop sniffing, they're probably on it, right? Think about their tail, their back feet. My dogs plant their feet when they're right on. Most dogs do. Look at their back feet. Train yourself to see, so you're not just leaning over and trying to see their nose. You might not be able to see it at all, right? And train your dog to feel confident that they can do it without seeing you. So that's really what we're working in this one. Okay, so let me pull back up this. So deep, accessible, narrow, and long. So the hide is here. It's set on the wall. And I'm gonna let my dog go into the search. This is just that starting level, level 1. She goes straight in, but it's narrow between the coffee table and the couch. You have to go into that space, and then we're wording as close to source as possible. I gave myself an in, right? There's a little bit of space there, right? So then we're gonna do it again. Next level. The hide's on this bench, stool, whatever it is. My dog has to come in because I blocked the front area. She comes in from the one side. We're kind of playing with the barrier stuff that we did last week. Can you go around the barrier to try and get to source, right? She wants to come this way, or a little more airflow on this side. Then she realizes she has to go around, and she works in to source, and I can mark and reward, trying to get that hide in as close to source as possible. And you can probably throw treats, right? So same search. She wants to do it again. I want to come in the other direction. I'll answer your question, Kathy, right as soon as we finish this one. So then she goes in, and then I can throw treats in there. She's catching her treats. If I can aim properly, and I can reward her for that. Yeah, go for it, Kathy.
Yeah, I like something like that. I was thinking about setting up, but then I think Mirko would just go to the right for sure and knock everything over. So do I just not do something unless I know it's, I can't use an X pen? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but you can use a couch in your wall and a chair that he can't push then because the chair is in the way, right? You can use some of that kind of stuff. I'd look for natural areas within your house that are going to be narrower like that. There's spaces. There's going to be spaces. Like I'm just looking in my office. Like I could probably move my chair back and it's going to create a different situation, right? Maybe I pull something slightly away from a wall and it will create that kind of problem. Look for dead ends. I'm trying to think, like, yeah, we would like to set it up and allow him to be a little more thoughtful than just plowing through. Trying to set something up like this with George, I might have him on leash. And if he tries to plow through that side, I might just hold the leash, just a little bit of leash pressure to help encourage him to come around this side. Right. And as soon as he decides to give up trying to push through here, I might just let go of that leash and then he can come around. So you can use a little bit of leash pressure. It's no different than on a vehicle and we're trying to use leash pressure, like don't go up, keep your feet on the ground. And then as soon as they're on the ground, you can let go of that pressure. Yeah, same kind of thing. Look for what you've got available. Small little like day seat kind of couches work really well because they're a little bit heavier and they provide a lot of structure. Yeah. Go for it, Michelle.
So I struggled with the next level of this with the barrier with the homework, because I thought our goal was to get them to push through to the deep inaccessible. So what I ended up doing was I left like a little hole, and then she knew something was in there and she was looking at me, but I didn't reward until she like really tried to push through.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so that was good to do then, to let them.
Yeah, especially for her, like the more that we can teach her to try and push into something, the better,
Okay.
right? So any way that we can encourage that. Now, I have enough space that I really want to encourage them to go into those narrower spaces, which I think would be good for her as well. So kind of thinking about more narrow versus like an X pen, but whatever we can do to create that. So here I've got the next example is that same couch that we watched, the inaccessible. I pulled it away from the wall. So now they're having to go down between the wall and the couch. Same kind of concept, right? But now they can't push through the other side. I've got like, I think it's against a cushion or something. But the only way into that hide is either over the top, which totally I think George would do. I haven't done this with him yet. Or coming in through that lengthwise. That makes sense, Michelle?
Yeah, I just
so-
wanted to make sure that it was fine because Quinn would kind of push at it and I would say, good girl, you can do it. I would say, you can do it, you can do it. And she finally did. So I just wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing, or was I ruining my dog?
You're not ruining your dog. You're creating resilience. I love it. Let's keep going with that. But at the same time, I do want her thinking too, like, can she get to a spot that's not going to resist against her? Right? We
Okay.
want those dogs that are thinking, can I get there a different way? Is there another option that's not as physically much of a barrier, right?
Okay, so make a maze and okay.
Yeah. And so these are like the purpose of these are to create those narrower spaces so that we want them to be able to push down in between alleyways or behind that truck, behind that trailer outside, right? So that kind of stuff happens a lot between desks in the wall at a teacher's like
So
some of
it's
those.
not comfortable. Okay, good.
Yeah, it's physically that pressure of the barriers, right? So that's really what the goal is this week, is to start working some of those things. And if you stand out here to the left with this couch, and once I hit play, we can kind of see that they can't see you when they go in here, right? And so then we're working with just watching tail, just listening, or you set up a camera. You can set up a camera pretty easily, or a mirror, and they can't see you, but you can see them. And so then you mark and reward and create the confidence in the dog to do this, even though they can't see you. And that can cause some struggles in some dogs because they want to see you to verify their right, or they're using some cues from you to create the alert behavior. And we're not realizing that until you're out of the line of sight. Yeah, go for it, Annette.
So when setting us hide like this, is the goal to try to figure out where the odor would travel
Not
necessarily?
necessarily. Not
Okay.
necessarily. So the example is with this one, and Tana did it twice, so she was kind of demonstrating that. I think the odor's going this way. She tried to go up over, she tried to go through a little bit, and then eventually she was like, oh, there's another way, and she ran into that other way. That's what we're trying to create, is a dog that's going to think a little bit more of like, okay, this barrier is not working. Alerting on the outside of this barrier is not going to get me my answer. How do I get closer? And then because they're getting closer, we're getting that. Now, could you change this up for a more novice dog or a dog that's more sensitive about pressure? Yes. Make the airflow go that way.
Okay.
And out. And so
Right.
now the dog is catching it from this side. The hard part for that dog might be to go into here. They might only get to this point and go, the hide's over there. I can't go in there. Okay, this is hard. So we might increase the distance between this and the wall, and then allow your dog to build that confidence to go down a narrow length where they can only back out. They can't turn around in there, right? And then
Right.
this is the hard part. So you would move your airflow, use little fans, so that that's the hard part. For my
Okay.
dogs, because they don't care about pressure, I kind of like having airflow this way. They have to think outside the box to figure out this part. Right? So the same kind of game can work for different dogs for different purposes.
Gotcha.
All right, so let's watch that last one and then we'll get to elevated. All right, so the hide's way back here. She comes in, she catches odor information. She's going a little wide. She says, oh my gosh, I really love that odor information. Caught a really nice edge over here. And she works into the hide. She can barely see me, so she popped up her head. I have to wait for her to put her nose on source, and then I can say yes, and I'm tossing cookies at her. And tossing cookies in there because I want to reward as close to source as possible. But in this situation, if I were to like rush in behind her, For some dogs, that's a lot. That's a ton of pressure. That's a big negative. So tossing cookies in there might be one option. Leaning on the couch and leaning over the couch and dropping cookies above her head might work as well. Okay. Does that make sense to you guys? Hopefully, yes, we're doing. All right.
Yes.
Like any confirmation. All right, so then the last one is elevation. And for elevation, we're really just keep working on the same concepts because I know a lot of people struggle with this one. So the more that we can kind of work with them, the better. So slightly higher elevation than what you were working last week if you were working them. Focusing on allowing your dog the space to work it. Really, that independence is what we're focusing on. Choose channeling for a lower level dog. The more that you can kind of play with that channeling and reinforce the dog for sourceable hides, even if it's not physically able to get their nose on the hide, but it's sourceable. So they go, oh, I know it. It's just like 3 inches above my nose or 6 inches above my nose. Because it's in that channel, they can understand exactly it's above their head. The more that we can train that understanding, the better off we are. So with some of this, you're trying to mark that moment that the dogs understand where the hide is. They don't need to get their nose on it to be able to do that. Okay. And I saw it like this morning, we were working one, Kirsten's dog, and she ended up like really pretty work, bracketing either side, understanding. And then she was like, there it is. She was a little bit up and she just sat and stared at it. Perfectly fine. That is not a problem. Now, are all judges going to be fair on that? Not necessarily. So if you're worried about your dog having a stare, basically because they're physically unable to get up there, they're worried about putting their feet on an object, which I'm totally fine with a huge dog not wanting to put their feet on an object. Or if they are bad back, bad hips, bad knees, right? We don't need those dogs always up. So the more that they can understand with 4 feet on the ground and even alerting from 4 feet on the ground, not a problem. But you might need to say alert and kind of pointing up, not with like a pointer finger, but with an open palm. That will help that kind of situation because maybe the judge isn't understanding what your dog has communicated very clearly, but it can happen, right? Because they want to see a dog crawling on a wall, whatever, right? So you might have to say alert and you're kind of pointing up towards laser beam where the eyes are pointing.
So Alex, I have a question with like if the dog gets too comfortable getting on her hind legs and you start getting dinged as a fault because she's putting, so where's the sweet spot with working something that's slightly elevated, but not letting them get their feet on
I
something?
would be setting the hide below the height of the nose when she gets on her back feet.
Okay.
To put more reinforcement that she can be 4 feet on the floor and solve these higher odor pictures. Right now is a great time to do it because your odor will go up, right? The heat, a lot of walls are holding a lot of retained heat inside and outside. And so as a result, you can set a hide only 3 or 4 inches above their nose and it will act as a higher hide. It's not dropping straight down. And so as a result, they kind of go up with their hind feet and they're like, oh crap, it's below me. And now they're having to readjust and put their nose lower. They're going to learn to keep their nose lower.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And then mark and reward before you get the pop-up if they're understanding that picture before they hop up. Hard thing is they don't always, right? She might be popping up as part of her understanding procedure, which she kind of does. So I think having hides a little bit lower will help with that kind of situation. That was a big change point that I made for both Tana and George. So Tana at the beginning, I didn't know how to set high hides to train this. She was my learning creature and she's had to learn and she's not as good on high hides. She really isn't because she never got the foundation with 4 feet on the ground to solve elevated hides. I thought just go up. But with George, he's really quite good at them. I kept most of his hides with the thought of how odor will drop right above him. So channeling kind of hides or a post and it's going to wrap around the backside of the post. We saw that last week and it will kind of channel down. Those create some really nice pictures where they can solve them with 4 feet on the ground and then go up underneath the object. And then from there, really going slowly or creating some sort of objects to put their feet on right below the hides, which not all dogs like. But if they can use objects around them to put their feet on instead of the wall itself, even better.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. I noticed I did vehicles this morning with him and odor was rising on the vehicle because it was so hot. I noticed he actually ended up curling his feet in and only touching the vehicle with his his wrists or whatever. It was kind of interesting. He knew to kind of keep his feet in. So that can help too. If they start learning they shouldn't put their feet on a surface, that can help.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so hide placements themselves, vertical seams as much as you can, 3 feet for level 1 if you're at that point. If you need to work up to that, work up to it. 4 feet for level 2, channeling is your friend. If you worked channeling last week, add another 6 to 12 inches, unless you really have like rising heat, right? Use your conditions, know your conditions. If it's causing odor to go up, it's not worth going higher. Allow it to be the same height and it's totally fine. You're going to create no problems that way. You might even have to lower it slightly. And then level 3, we're going to play with some convergence. So if you're working on those detective or the elite type puzzles and you really want to be pushing 4 to 5 feet hide is one hide. The other hide is going to be on the top of the back of a chair. So like a dining room chair on the back part of it. Or whatever kind of chair, doesn't matter, but you're going to have it very open as a result. And then your other hide is going to have channeling downwards, hopefully. So if you have a wall with a window, it's going to be the opposite wall of your house. Okay. 1 hide, 2 in level 3, about 10 minutes of aging should be fine. If it's really cold because you're in Australia, then you might need more time. Start line, not super specific. These are self-discovery, right? Allow your dog to discover those hides, learn the value, learn how to work it, watch to make sure the odor information is there. If it's not happening, you can abort it, not a big deal. You should be able to see bracketing on either side, turning around, going. You can see the odors coming a little bit lighter. They're getting a little bit less focused, intense. They turn around, they come back. Now you got 2 edges to bracket. Sourcing so that they're really detail searching, allowing that vertical surface. And then displacement behaviors. If they do, what does it look like for your dog? Are they sniffing the ground? Do they go into handler focus? Right? Like the looking that Annette was getting is a displacement behavior. What do I do now? It could be sniffing the ground. It could be going for a toy that isn't even a toy. It could be scavenging for food. Right? Level 3 is not a handling exercise. If your dog is stuck at the nose level hide, don't handle them to the other one. You can abort your search. If it's an easy one to pull off the back of a chair, you could pull that chair hide off. I don't think if your other one's on a wall, you're going to end up with enough residual in the wall. I don't think it's worth pulling that to help your dog to the chair hide. But the chair hide you could pull and allow your dog to work the other one. But I don't want you to be so focused on trying to find another that it gets in the way of your dog learning how to work an elevated hide. Okay, so if this is a problem for you, abort it, pull out one of the hides, pull out the chair or whatever, let your dog work the other hide and learn instead of you having to handle them to it, because that's not self-discovery anymore, that's you handling. Right? And it's okay to interrupt, pull them out, and then we can work it again. Additional challenge. So this is kind of the last little piece. This is the add-on. And if your dog is working really well at something, maybe it's the under, maybe that's kind of a simple thing for your dog and you've worked a bunch of them and your dog's pretty confident in them. Try playing with your proofing. This is handler proofing. Just one search, don't like overdo it, because then we're just basically training our dogs that we're bad handlers. That's counterproductive. We want to train them that we're good handlers, but every once in a while we're bad. You're wanting to see that your dog can still succeed at working the puzzle despite you turning the wrong way, continuing motion, whatever it might be. Okay. When you're proofing, it should start when your dog starts searching. It should stop when you say the word yes or alert, if you're using that as your marker. Okay. It should not change and become a cue for your dog solving problem kind of moment. Okay. So I have 3 options that you could pick. One is motion, steady motion, pacing back and forth within your search area. Find a path, stick to it. Do not change your pace or your path. Or number 2, you could do position, which is standing somewhere in your whole search, which might be kind of what you're doing already, but maybe you pick a weird spot to stand. This can be near your hide or far away from your hide. You could even use a mirror or a spotter, someone else, or a camera if you can't see your dog at source. So example would be this, like that narrow space. Maybe you are sitting on a chair way out of view of your dog, but you've got a mirror, you can see them. Orientation. Choose purposely to face a cold object. So your feet and your shoulders are all facing the object, the entire search. If you feel it's too hard, call your dog, move out of the space, and then just start again without the proof. I don't want you to change your proofing choice just because it's difficult on your dog, because then your dog is going to start learning they can check in with you to make you do what they want you to do. If you've got a Sheltie, this is the absolute worst thing that you could do, because they are like wily little creatures, I'm going to tell you. So just abort the search, go back to your start, search it like normal, and say, okay, I'm going to try this proofing on a different kind of hide because this is really hard on my dog. Okay. Any questions about the proofing piece? You can apply it anywhere if you'd like. If your dog is struggling with this stuff, I wouldn't even worry about it. This is something you can apply later. Okay. Questions? Yeah, go for it, Annette.
So I just had a question on, can you give me some suggestions or ideas for what on the elevated hides, what would be like a channeling object in a house?
Yes. So, haha.
Because I'm like, I can't think of
Get
a
it.
channeling type object.
I don't know if this changes it for you guys. Do you guys see like big speaker picture now?
No, we just see everybody's names.
Oh, maybe that's something for you guys too. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to this. I was like, oh, maybe it will work. So one example would be like in my room, I don't know how much of this shows for you guys, but in my little office, I've got this shelving unit beside
Right.
the window. Now, beside the window is not great because it means that this window is going to be hot, but this shelving unit creates a nice inside corner. And so I could set a hide about nose height, so that shelf with the little horse head on it, I could set a hide there. And if this wasn't on a window side, it should channel and it should move up and down against that. Okay. So that would be one example. Another example would be door frames. Typically there's framing around a door frame, shelving units, cabinets. Sometimes there's a lot of different options with those. Wily little Shelties.
So what about then outside? Would a pillar that's got stucco on it,
That could work.
as long as it's on the shaded side, or does it matter?
Downwind most likely.
Okay.
Because, and this is like a, here, let's go back to our whiteboard, because that worked well. Share.
I'm just trying to think of areas inside and outside.
I get that. So with pillars, so if we've got a pillar, I'm trying to do kind of airflow stuff, which this is more like OTA theory stuff. But, okay, so we're going to do side view and top view. So here's their side view. Hide's placed here. Maybe it's at 30 inches or whatever it might be, okay? Top view. So if this is my airflow and it's blowing this direction, it has to split around this object. Okay, so airflow splitting around. On the backside, as it's splitting around, it's going to suck back into this void on the backside. And so as a result, as it's sucking back in, it will pull that odor off of the hide. And because it's a void, this airflow sometimes will pull back into this space, but because it's a void the whole way up and down, this odor ends up pulling down as well as up because it's whirling in here.
So that's assuming you're setting it on the downwind side.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So if we accidentally set it on the upwind side, it doesn't have any of that channeling effect and it will slip away.
Right. Okay.
Which is really nice as an open post kind of hide. But for your dog to get it, now they have to collect this breadcrumb, this breadcrumb, this breadcrumb, and they might even alert on this side of the object.
Right.
And they're correct. They're totally fine, unless this is a huge, huge pillar. Maybe they have to work around it. But on a smaller pillar, they're totally correct. But you can see how that effect happens. And then if we had a hide on the side of the pillar, there we go. This odor is going to shoot off with this. Some of it is going to wrap into here. So you might get a little bit of channeling down. right? But the rest of it's gonna go out, which is really nice for it to expand. So what if we had airflow? Here's the one extra caveat. I'm trying not to go too long. Is if we had airflow that flipped from here to here to here. The side one is pretty nice. Even back here is pretty nice. Right? So it's the average of the downwind side works totally fine.
Okay.
Because you're going to end up with that channeling, hopefully, on any of those sides that will come down.
Okay. Cool.
Because I know airflow is never consistent.
Right.
Average.
Especially outside.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Good question. Super question. All right, I'm going to stop the recording there.